Chapter 35 Fear Smells. Flora's father never walked through the hallways of the Blixen Arms. He ran, and Flora Buckman, holding her possibly concussed squirrel, ran with him. Flora and George Buckman ran because the Blixen Arms was owned and managed by a man named Mr. Klaus, who was in the possession of an enormous, angry orange cat, also named Mr. Klaus. The cat Mr. Klaus prowled the hallways of the Blixen Arms, peeing on the residents' doors and vomiting in their stairwells. Mr. Klaus was also notorious for hiding in the green gloom of the hallways and waiting until some unlucky person stepped out of the door of his or her apartment, or into the main entrance of the Blixen Arms, or down into the basement laundry room, and then pouncing on the person's ankle, biting and scratching him, growling, and sometimes, weirdly enough, purring. Flora's father's ankles were deeply scarred. "The cat can smell your fear," Flora shouted as she ran. "It's a scientific fact." She had read about fear and terrible things can happen to you. "Fear smells," said terrible things, and the smell of fear further incites the predator. Ahead of her, her father laughed his hearty and seemingly endless laugh. If Flora had more time, she would have said, "For the love of Pete, what's so funny?" But she didn't have time. There was a squirrel to save. Chapter 36 Surprise, Anger, Joy. Flora stood and stared at the sign on apartment 267. It was made of fake wood and engraved with white letters that spelled out the words "Residing Within." The doctor's mission. What was the apostrophe doing there? Did the doctor own the mission? And what was it with exclamation marks? Did people not know what they were for? Surprise, anger, joy, that was exclamation marks were for. They had nothing to do with who resided where. But at this particular moment, the exclamation marks seemed entirely appropriate. It was terribly exciting that a doll who didn't know how to use apostrophes lived in apartment 267. "What are you staring at?" said her father. He was putting his key into the door of apartment 271, and he was laughing softly. "A doctor lives here?" said Flora. "Dr. Measham," said her father. "I'm going to see if he can help Ulysses," said Flora. "Excellent idea," said her father. He opened the door of his apartment. He looked to the left and then to the right. "Keep your eyes open for Mr. Claus," he said. "I'll join you in a bit." He slammed the door just as Flora raised her hand to knock on Dr. Measham's door. But she didn't get the chance to knock. The door swung open of its own accord. An old lady stood there smiling, her dentures glowing white in the perpetual green twilight of the hallway. Someone inside the apartment was screaming. No! Someone was singing! It was opera music. "At last," said the old lady. "I'm so glad to see your face." Flora turned and looked behind her. "I am speaking to you, little flower." "Me?" said Flora. "Yes, you, little flower. Flora Bell, beloved of your father, Mr. George Buckman. Come in, little flower, come in." "Actually," said Flora, I'm looking for a doctor. I have a medical emergency. Of course, said the old woman. We are, all of us, medical emergencies. You must come in now. I have been waiting for so long. She reached out and yanked Flora over the threshold of 267 and into the apartment. The criminal element had a lot to say about entering the home of a stranger. They suggested that you do so at your own risk, and that if you make the questionable decision to enter a home of someone you didn't know, a door to the outside world should be left open at times to facilitate a quick escape. The old lady slammed the door shut. The opera music was very loud now. Flora looked down at the hand that was on her arms. It was spotted and wrinkled. Beloved? Thought Flora. Me? Chapter 37. Singing with the Angels. He woke with a single giant, watery eye staring at him. He blinked. His head hurt. The gigantic eye was mesmerizing and beautiful. It was like staring at a small planet, a whole, sad, and lonely world. Ulysses found it hard to look away. He stared at the eye and the eye stared back. Was he dead? Had he been hit over the head with a shovel? He could hear someone singing. He knew he should be afraid, but he didn't feel afraid. So much had happened to him in the last 24 hours that somewhere along the way he had stopped worrying. Everything had become interesting as opposed to worrisome. If he was dead, well, that was interesting too. My eyesight is not what it was, said a voice. When I was a girl in Blandermersin, I could read the sign before anyone else even saw the sign. Not that it helped me. Seeing things clearly, sometimes it is safer not to see. In Blandermersin, the words on the sign were often not the truth. And I ask you, what good does it do you to read the words of a lie? But that is a different story. I will tell that story later. I find this magnifying glass to be a great assistance. Yes, I see him. He is very much alive. I know he is alive, said another voice. I can tell that. Flora was here with him. How comforting. Yes, I see. He is a squirrel. He is missing much fur, said the voice. What kind of doctor are you? Said Flora. The voices in the room kept singing. They were full of sadness and love and desperation. The voice belonging to the giant eye hummed along with them. Ulysses tried to get to his feet. A gentle hand pushed him back. I am the Dr. Misham, who is the doctor of philosophy, said the voice. My husband, the other Dr. Misham, was the medical doctor, but he passed away. This is euphemism, of course. I mean to say that he is dead. He is departed from the world. He is elsewhere and singing with the angels. Ha! There is another euphemism. Singing with the angels. I ask you, why is it so hard to stay away from the euphemisms? They creep in. Always an attempt to make the difficult things more pleasing. So, let me try again. He's dead. The other Dr. Misham, the medical one, and I hope that he is somewhere singing. Perhaps singing something from Mozart, but who knows where he is and what he is doing. For the love of Pete, said Flora again. I need a medical doctor. Ulysses might have a concussion. Shh. Calm. Why are you so agitated? There is no need to worry. You're worried about what? You will tell me what happened that makes you think concussion. Uh, he hit a door, said Flora. With his head? Yes. This could give him a concussion. When I was a girl in Mason, people were often getting concussions. Gifts from the trolls, you understand? Gifts from the trolls? Said Flora. What are you talking about? Look at him. Does he look like he has a concussion? The gigantic eye of Dr. Misham came closer, much closer. It studied him. The beautiful voices sang. Dr. Misham hummed. Ulysses felt strangely peaceful. If he spent the rest of his life being stared at by a giant eye and hummed over, things could be worse. The pupils of his little eyes are not dilated, said Dr. Misham. Dilated pupils, said Flora. I couldn't remember that one. So this is good? This is a hopeful sign? Next we will see if he remembers what happened. We will check for amnesia. Flora's face came into view. He was glad to see her and her round head. Ulysses, she said, do you remember what happened? Do you remember being in the giant donut? Did he remember being Rita's hair? Did he remember Rita screaming? Did he remember the man with the knife? Did he remember flying? Did he remember hitting his head very hard? Did he remember not getting to eat a giant donut? Let's see. Yes, 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 and yes. He nodded. Oh, said Dr. Misham. He nods his head. He communicates with you. He's different, special, said Flora. A special kind of squirrel. Excellent, good, I believe this. Something happened to him. Yes, he hit a door with his head. No, said Flora. Before that, he was vacuumed. Sucked up in a vacuum cleaner. There was a small silence. And then there was more humming from Dr. Misham. Ulysses tried again to get his feet and was again pushed gently back. You are speaking euphemistically, said Dr. Misham. I'm not, said Flora. I'm speaking literally. He was vacuumed. It changed him. Certainly it did, said Dr. Misham. Absolutely. It changed him to be vacuumed. She raised her magnifying glass to her eye and leaned in closer, studying him. She lowered the magnifying glass. How did it change him, please? Ulysses stood on all fours, and no one pushed him back. You will speak without euphemisms, said Dr. Misham. He has powers, said Flora. He's strong, and he can fly, she paused. Also, he types, he writes, poetry. A typewriter? Poetry? Flight? Said Dr. Misham. She sounded delighted. His name is Ulysses. This, said Dr. Misham, is an important name. Well, said Flora, it was the vacuum cleaner that almost killed him. Dr. Misham looked Ulysses in the eye. It was rare for someone to look at a squirrel in the eye. Ulysses pulled himself up straighter. He looked back at Dr. Misham. He met her gaze. You must also list among his powers the ability to understand. This is no small thing to understand, Dr. Misham said to Flora. Then he turned back to Ulysses. You are feeling maybe a little sick to the stomach." Ulysses shook his head. "Good," said Dr. Misham. She clapped her hands together. "I am thinking that Ulysses is not concussed. There is only this little cut on his head. Other than that, fine, good, great. I'm thinking that maybe the squirrel is hungry." Ulysses nodded. Yes, yes. He was very hungry. He would like eggs, sunny side up. He would like a donut with sprinkles." He stared at the painting. "This boat is getting eaten by a gigantic squid." He nodded. "It's a tragedy," said Flora. "There are people on board that boat. Look, you can see them. They're ant-size, but they're people." Ulysses squinted. He nodded again. "They're all going to die," explained Flora. "Every last one of them. As a superhero, you should be outraged. You should want to save them. Incandescent would." "Ah," said Dr. Misham, coming up behind them. "You are studying my poor lonely giant squid." "Lonely?" said Flora. "The giant squid is the loneliest of all God's creatures. He can sometimes go for the whole of his life without seeing another of his kind." For some reason, Dr. Misham's word conjured up the face of William Beaver, white-haired and dark-eyed. Flora's heart squinched up. "Go away, William Beaver," she thought. "That squid is a villain," said Flora out loud. "He needs to be vanquished. He's eating a boat, and he's going to eat all the people on the boat." "Yes, well, loneliness makes us do terrible things," said Dr. Misham. "And that is why the picture is there, to remind me of this. Also, because the other Dr. Misham painted it when he was young and joyful." "Good grief," thought Flora. "What did he paint when he was old and depressed?" "Now, you will sit on the horsehair sofa, please," said Dr. Misham, "and I will bring out the jelly sandwiches." Flora sat down on the couch. Ulysses was still on her shoulder. She put up her hand and touched him. He was warm. He was a small engine of warmness. "The giant squid is the loneliest creature in all existence," said Flora out loud. And then, to keep things grounded and in perspective, she muttered, "Seal blubber." And then she whispered, "Do not hope. Instead, observe." She kept her hand on the squirrel. Chapter 39. The Tears Roll Off. Dr. Misham came out of the kitchen holding a pink plate with small sandwiches on it. She sat down next to Flora. "You're enjoying the horsehair sofa," she said to Flora. "I guess," said Flora. She wasn't sure exactly how someone enjoyed a horsehair sofa. "You will eat a jelly sandwich," said Dr. Misham. She extended the plate to Flora. Ulysses leaped off Flora's shoulder and into her lap. He sniffed the plate. "Our patient is hungry," said Dr. Misham. "He never had breakfast," said Flora. She took 2 sandwiches and handed one to Ulysses. "This sofa," said Dr. Misham, "is the sofa of my grandmother. She was born on this sofa, in Blandermissen. She lived the whole of her life there, and she is buried there in a dark wood." But that is a different story. What I meant to say is that when I was a girl in Blandermissen, I sat on the sofa and spoke with my grandmother about inconsequential things, well, into the gloom of the evening. That is what a girl in Blandermissen did in those days. She was expected to speak of inconsequential things as gloom of the evening descended. Also, she must knit. Always the gloom was descending in Blandermissen. Always, one was knitting outfits for the little trolls. What little trolls? Said Flora. And where's Blandermissen? Never mind about the trolls for now. I meant only to say that life was very gloomy then, and what was always knitting. It sounds lousy. It was exactly this, lousy, said Dr. Misham. She smiled. Her dentures were very bright. There was a smear of grape jelly on one of her fake incisors. Flora reached for another sandwich. How terrible things can happen to you? Ever? Warned against eating jelly sandwiches in the house of a woman from Blandermissen? Your father is a lonely man, said Dr. Misham. Also very sad. To leave you, this broke his heart. It did? Said Flora. Yes. Mr. George Buckman has sat on this horsehair sofa many times. He has talked of his sadness. He has wept. This sofa has seen the tears of many people. It is a sofa that is good for tears. They roll off it, you see. Her father had sat on this couch and wept as the gloom of the evening descended. Flora suddenly felt like she might cry too. What was wrong with her? Seal blubber, she thought. The word steadied her. She handed another sandwich to Ulysses. Your father is very capacious of heart, said Dr. Misham. Do you know what this means? Flora shook her head. It means the heart of George Buckman is large. It is capable of containing much joy and much sorrow. Oh, said Flora. For some reason, she heard William Spivey's voice saying that the universe was a random place. Capacious heart, said Dr. Misham's voice. Random universe, said William Spivey's capacious, random heart universe. Flora felt dizzy. I am a cynic, she announced for no particular reason, and in a too loud voice. Bah, cynics, said Dr. Misham. Cynics are people who are afraid to believe. She waved her hand in front of her face as if she was brushing away a fly. Do you believe in, things? Said Flora. Yes, I believe, said Dr. Misham. She smiled her too bright smile again. You heard of Pascal's wager? No, said Flora. Pascal, said Dr. Misham, had it that since it could not be proven whether God existed, one might as well believe that he did, because there was everything to gain by believing and nothing to lose. This is how it is for me. What do I lose if I choose to believe? Nothing. Take this squirrel, for instance, Ulysses. Do I believe he can type poetry? Sure, I do believe it. There is much more beauty in the world if I believe such a thing is possible. Flora and Dr. Misham looked at Ulysses. He was holding half a sandwich in his front paws. There were blobs of grape jelly in his whiskers. "Do you know what a superhero is?" said Flora. "Sure, I know what a superhero is." "Ulysses is a superhero," said Flora. "But he hasn't really done anything heroic yet. Mostly he's just flown around. He lifted the vacuum cleaner over his head. He wrote some poetry. He hasn't saved anyone, though. And that's what superheroes are supposed to do, save people." "Who knows what he will do?" Dr. Misham said. "Who knows whom he will save? So many miracles have not yet happened." Flora watched as one of Jelly Bob's Ulysses' whiskers trembled and fell in slow motion to the horsehair sofa. "All things are possible," said Dr. Misham. "When I was a girl in Blandemissing, the miraculous happened every day, or every other day, or every third day. Actually, sometimes it did not happen at all, even on the third day, but still, we expected it. You see what I'm saying? Even when it didn't happen, we were expecting it. We knew the miraculous would come." There was a knock at the door. "See," said Dr. Misham. "This will be your father, Mr. George Buckman." Flora stood and went to the door and opened it. It was her father, and he was smiling again, still, which seems him kind of miraculous. "Hi, Pop," she said. "You see," said Dr. Misham. He smiles. Flora's father's smile got bigger. He took off his hat. He bowed. "George Buckman," he said. "How do you do?" Flora couldn't help it. She smiled too. She was still smiling when a noise that sounded like the end of the world echoed through the hallway of the Blixen Arms. 1 minute, her father was standing there with his hat in his hand, smiling, and the next minute, Mr. Claus, the cat one, came out of nowhere and landed right on top of George Buckman's unprotected head. Chapter 40. Vanquished. Fortunately, a superhero was present. Sunny side up, Ulysses jumped on top of Mr. Claus, the cat. Ulysses tried to pull and lift Mr. Claus, and Ulysses threw him all the way to the end of the hallway. For the love of Pete! Holy Bagumba! Mr. Claus' head was hurting because he hit the wall. And Ulysses thought to himself, vanquished. And the superhero was enormously, inordinately pleased with himself. He felt immensely powerful. He felt like writing a poem. Chapter 41. I Promise. There were in the car. Flora's father's hands were on the steering wheel at 10 o'clock and 2. Flora was sitting up front and Ulysses' head was out the window. They were heading back to Flora's mother's house in spite of Flora's protestations. "We have to go back," said her father. "We have to return at the regular Saturday afternoon time. We have to act normal, natural, unconcerned." Flora wanted to object, but she could read the writing on the wall. Or rather, She could read the words that hovered above her and her father and the squirrel. Destiny could no longer be forestalled. The arch-nemesis must be faced. "Holy Bagumba!" said her father. His right ear was wrapped in a huge amount of gauze. His head looked lopsided. Wholly anticipated occurrences. A squirrel vanquished a cat. He shook his head. He smiled. "And now it's time for another battle," said Flora. "Everything will be fine," said her father. "So you say," said Flora. It started to rain. Ulysses pulled his head back inside the car. He looked up at Flora, and the sight of his little whiskered face calmed her somehow. She smiled at him, and the squirrel sighed happily and curled up in her lap. "When I was a girl in Blendermissing," Dr. Misham had said to Flora when they were all living 267, "we wondered always if we would see each other again. Each day was uncertain, so to say goodbye to someone was uncertain too. Would you see them again? Who could say? Blendermissing was a place of dark secrets, unmarked graves, terrible curses. Trolls were everywhere. So we said goodbye to each other the best way we could. We said, 'I promise to always turn back towards you.' I say those words to you now, Flora Belle. I promise to always turn back toward you. And now you must say them to me. I promise to always turn back toward you," Flora had said. She whispered the words again, now to the squirrel. "I promise to always turn back toward you." She put a finger on Ulysses' chest. His tiny heart was beating out a message that felt like, "I promise, I promise, I promise." Hearts were the strangest things. "Pop," said Flora. "Yes," said her father. "Can I feel your heart?" "My heart?" said her father. "Okay, sure." And then for the first time ever, George Buckman took both of his hands off the steering wheel while the car was in motion. He opened his arms wide. Flora gently moved Ulysses out of her lap and onto the seat beside her, and she reached up across and put her head on the left side of her father's chest. And she felt it, her father's heart, beating there inside of him. It felt very certain, very strong and very large, just like Dr. Misham's had said. Capacious. "Thank you," she told him. "Sure," he said. "You bet." He put his hand back on the steering wheel at 10 o'clock and 2, and the three of them, Flora, her father, and the squirrel, traveled the rest of the way home in a strange and peaceful silence. The only noise was from the windshield wipers. They hummed back and forth, singing a sweet, out-of-tune song. The squirrel slept, and Flora Belle Buckman was happy.